welcome again to another episode of SacTown Talks. Today, we're joined by Matthew Hargrove of the California Business Properties Association. Matthew, welcome to the program, and thanks for joining us.
Jarhett, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I know, it's exciting to talk about the wonderful world of commercial real estate here in California, one of its great assets. And, let's hear a little bit about yourself. Come on, how did you get involved in kind of Sacramento politics and with the Commercial Real Estate Association?
Sure. Well, going in the way back, I've been involved in and around the Capitol since 1992. In 92, I started working actually in the building next door to where we are now for the University of California, the state government relations officer, a gentleman named Steve Arditi, who many people watching this will know Steve.
Mm-hmm.
He is just a legend in the business, and I started out as basically their legislative clerk while I was going to UC Davis. Had that as a part-time job and ended up working there full-time for the first half of the 90s. Being a legislative clerk was great because I really learned the insides and outsides of the legislative process, which we still adhere to these days. But just understanding how a bill becomes a law, how it really becomes a law, the technicalities of that was what I was supposed to be tracking and was tracking at the University of California. So I really appreciate that. And looking back on it, that is over 3 decades ago.
I know, it's amazing how quick that goes, huh? So then, you're working there, and then kind of what was your kind of next step?
So working there, ended up graduating from UC Davis, was very much into politics at the time and just loved following everything that was happening from the point of view of the University of California. Decided that I would love to work in the legislature and started putting my resume out to just a narrow few legislators who I had identified that I would really like to work for.
Yeah.
One of them was a gentleman named Brooks Firestone, and I dropped a letter off at his office. I was living on 16th and Q
Mm-hmm.
On a Friday, and Sunday morning that weekend, I got a call directly from Brooks saying, hey, just got your resume and want to know if you want to come in and interview. I said, sure, thinking that would be Monday. He said, all right, well, I'm in the office right now, so swing on by if you can. So ended up going in on a Sunday afternoon and just chatting with Brooks, and ended up working for Brooks for through a couple election cycles with him, and just really loved working for him. He was just a great person.
Because that's right when the new term limits came in, right? So
it was before the new term limits, so that would have been 94. It was during all the speakership issues and the speakership battles, and recalls and things like that. Which I didn't do the political side very much. I came in as his legislative aide and worked on legislative bills, and he was the chair of higher education at the time. So that was a good connection with the University of California, and it really started the point in my career where I was really branching out and connecting with a lot of different people.
Yeah. So how did you branch out from, higher ed to kind of where you are today?
Well, the next step was after a few campaigns, and again, I was working for Brooks in the Capitol, but when he went to do some campaigns, I worked on those campaigns. So there was a lieutenant governor's campaign that he was doing that I just had a blast working with him on, because Brooks owned a winery, and his kids were setting up Firestone Brewing at the time. So we would, on the lieutenant governor's campaign, I was his body man. And as we drove up and down the state of California, wherever we were, he had some connection with a grape grower or a winery owner or a brewery owner. And, we'd end up stopping by somewhere like, Sierra Nevada when we were up in the Chico area. Yeah. And it was... I just really want to say it was a blast working for him, because he was a very down-to-earth, pragmatic person. He was very nice and kind. He was exactly as you see him in public, and he had all these connections from his family. His
weren't they in horse racing too? And
So,
all sorts of stuff.
I
Right?
mean, yeah. So he, of course, they started out as tires, but I, I don't think Brooks was in horse racing.
Yeah.
Brooks was very focused on the winery, and then it was his kid setting up the brewery.
Was it his one of his kids, the one who was on the Bachelor?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's one of my lame claims to fame is I actually slept in the bed of the first Bachelor.
Yeah.
When I was working on the campaign with Brooks. He was actually living in a double wide trailer, he and his just lovely wife, Kate. And I stayed in Andrew's room. So that's a funny stat I have
That
is
is funny.
I slept in the bed of the first Bachelor.
Yeah, that's funny. So, you worked for Brooks for a while, and then kind of what was your next leap?
So Brooks ended up running for Congress. That he didn't win that race, and at that point, I started looking elsewhere, and ended up being hired by just a lovely person at UC Davis named Marge Dickinson. She was the director or the assistant vice chancellor of government relations for the UC Davis campus, my alma mater. So I went to work at UC Davis and was there for 6 or 7 years. Was their state government relations guy, which meant I got to spend a lot of time on campus at UC Davis, which if you can work on a college campus, I highly recommend it. They're lovely, and the speed is a little bit slower than they are in the Capitol. But then I also got my fix of statewide politics because I was the primary contact to state legislators in the governor's office that when there was UC Davis issues. Had a lot of interaction with Gray Davis at that point.
So what is this, like 2003?
So I think it was around 1998,
98, okay.
1999 that I went
Gray
to work
was just
at UC
elected,
Davis.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. So worked with Gray Davis, and then after that, when Governor Schwarzenegger came in, we ended up doing a lot with the governor at campus also, mainly because of the hydrogen and energy stuff that the governor was very interested in. One very fun event I got to do at UC Davis was launch the hydrogen highway with Governor Schwarzenegger, and he came in with a hydrogen Hummer and learned what a daytime spotlight was at that point, which I'd done a lot of press conferences and outdoor press events, but I'd never seen a daytime spotlight. That was a little bit of the Hollywood that the governor brought in, and it was just fascinating and fun to work on those issues at the UC Davis campus.
Yeah. So here you are. You're still in higher ed up to the early 2000s. Kind of when did you make the jump to go into kind of the property association?
So I knew Rex because he was part of the Alumni Association board in the early 2000s. And in 2006, I believe, 2005 maybe, we're actually at a Rotary luncheon for the Causeway Classic. And I sat at Rex's.
What year is this?
I think it was 2005, maybe 2005. It was 2006.
Is this after J.T. O'Sullivan left?
It was around that time.
Around that time,
yeah. But so it was a Causeway Classic Rotary lunch, and I knew Rex a little bit from the Alumni Association, and it was just a blast sitting with him at this Rotary lunch because he was paying fines and paying other people's fines and suggesting people get up and talk, and Rotary lunches can be very interesting. But Rex was just an absolute blast to sit next to, and we made a good connection. And about a month later, he gives me a call and says, "Hey, would you ever be interested in coming and doing some real lobbying for the private sector and leaving UC Davis?" I said, "I'll come in and talk, and let's see what the job is." So one thing led to another, and 18 years later, I'm still here.
So like what made you jump? It sounded like you had a pretty good spot there at Davis. You seem to enjoy yourself, the pace, kind of. What in your mind made you kind of like, oh, let's do something else?
First of all, working for Rex,
Yeah.
he's a legend. He's just a great guy and a good human. And it sounded at that time in my career, coming over and doing some actual direct lobbying, um, not under the umbrella of a state agency. UC is not
Right.
technically a state agency, but it was a lot of reaction and
Bureaucracy you had to go through.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I was in my early 30s at the time, and it sounded like a fun and fascinating thing to do. Come over and start
Right.
lobbying for the private sector. And it was the right choice. I had a blast. Rex and I were a very good team, and I love this business and I love what we're doing.
Yeah. So kind of, the California Business Property Association 18 years ago, what did it look like versus today? Or is it pretty similar?
Very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're a very small shop. We have 4 full-time employees. That's what we had at the time. Our infrastructure and our setup is, to this day, very much the same that Rex had set up. And Rex came in to C.B.P.A. in the 1983.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we are still operating in the same way that Rex had us all set up. We remain a very small shop. We like it that way.
Yeah.
We've modernized a couple things. We have a different website, but even the colors that we use are in the logo that we have. Everything goes back to what Rex put together at C.B.P.A.
Right. And kind of like in those 18 years, kind of like, the battles you fought or the things you've waged over at the legislature, is it kind of the same things you guys are still facing these, last basically 2 decades?
I mean, I hate to make it sound like Groundhog's Day, but yes,
Yeah.
a lot of the issues are the same.
Uh-huh.
Property taxes in general. COVID threw some interesting curveballs in there, but the commercial real estate issues, they're very wide and broad because we have so many different types of members, and we can get into
Right.
the
Like
different
anything
companies.
can affect it, right? Like
Yeah.
something like minimum wage,
So
you wouldn't really think about, but like a lot of these fast food companies who I'm sure, your members own some of these buildings are
Yeah.
probably concerned about that because,
Yeah.
you're eating an overhead that could go to rent.
Yep, everything minimum wage, energy issues, building code, taxes. Taxes is really the one that generates the most excitement amongst our members because it has the biggest impact.
Right.
And of course, Prop 13 and Prop 218 in California is such a unique protection that nowhere else in the nation
Right.
has. That anytime something comes around that touches any of those things, property taxes, parcel taxes, ends up being something that generates a lot of excitement. But we're working on everything right now, from building code to leasing issues to homeless issues and everything in between, because all of those issues ultimately impact commercial property.
Right. And we're seeing that, right, in a kind of unprecedented scale. We keep hearing about this like commercial real estate showdown that's going to happen with interest rates and kind of values. Kind of you're seeing like San Francisco, you're seeing it a lot where a bunch of holders of real estate are just handing over the notes, or you're seeing buildings trade for 1/3 of the value from pre-2020. Pretty crazy.
You're definitely seeing a adjustment in the market.
Yeah.
Some areas are larger adjustments than others.
Yeah. And kind of just like, I don't know, something we're talking about off camera, like something like, something you guys are interested in is the retail theft thing. And you'd be like, oh, why does commercial real estate happen? But like if CVS and Walgreens can't exist here, the owners of those buildings suffer.
Absolutely. And retail theft is not just what you see, on the news at night where folks go in and steal stuff and come out. That is a huge piece of it. But we see it as a little bit of a broader issue too. Retail theft is everything from those smash and grabs or walking in and taking stuff and walking out, to also things that are impacting our members that you don't see in the retail stores. Things like industrial buildings getting raided and picked off, construction sites, things are getting stolen from them. Those aren't always the things that you talk about directly with retail theft, but it's all wrapped up in a lot of the reforms that are moving through the legislature right now and the initiative that's on the ballot.
It's interesting. So, I like following kind of what they call it retweet, real estate Twitter. And, you have all these commercial building owners and stuff that are talking about real estate all over the country. And there's kind of like these two factions. There's like this one faction is stay out of California. The taxes are too high, too many problems. And there's other factions that say California is one of the best areas to own real estate because of some of the things you're talking about. Prop 13, Prop 218. Can you kind of talk to us about kind of Prop 13 and Prop 218 and kind of why it's, so crucial to your members that, these things stay intact?
Sure. California, I don't need to go on the history of Prop 13, but Howard Jarvis in 1978 did a taxpayers revolution in California. It passed Proposition 13. Over the years, that led to a number of different refinements and different other propositions. Prop 218 is the one that we focus on right now because of some of the recent court cases. But California is a great place to own commercial real estate.
Mm-hmm.
That sunshine tax is, I don't think we've hit the tipping point yet for a great majority of commercial property owners. We can't pick up our buildings and move.
Right.
So that's one of the things that C.B.P.A. tries to do is work with the legislature and the governor's office and others to make sure they understand what the policies will do to impact commercial real estate. And sometimes that's a tough conversation to have in California. But ultimately, again, our buildings don't move. We're seeing an adjustment after COVID. We were able to work with the legislature on some of the more onerous bills that were coming through during COVID. The commercial real estate, our owners and our members actually went out of their way during COVID to make sure that tenants and employees and janitors and window washers, all of us got through COVID in a way that allowed us to be set up for success. We're still feeling some of the adjustment in that with especially in the office industry.
The world changed, yeah.
But I think that commercial real estate is robust enough in California that it's going to get figured out. And you're right, there's a lot of folks that don't want to touch California, but we have a lot of people, a lot of companies that are highly invested in California, do want to stay here, think it's worth it. And and that's not just on the commercial real estate side, that's our tenants. Those large companies, those small companies, those medium-sized companies that are our tenants. So not everything we do is directly related to commercial real estate, but trying to make sure that the conditions are there so we can have a healthy balance with our tenants, with our buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Prop 13 for many, many years kept property taxes predictable. They kept them low.
Right.
When everything else was kind of going haywire and going high, you could always count on Prop 13 and property taxes to be a stable source of revenue for the state. And that's something that we still believe is true. And for many, many years, Prop 13, Prop 218, which gave us the 2/3, or which clarified the 2/3 vote majority, has kept it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, there's been a few court cases, and there's been some attempts at the ballot box to undercut Prop 13 and that 2/3 vote. And that's where we are today with some of the issues that are going to be on the ballot and that have recently come through the legislature. Those things right now are the things that my members are probably concerned about most. The changes to the property tax system and retail theft.
Right. Because, people are saying this now with homes, right? Like it's not so much the value of the property, but it's, the monthly payments, right? And if you start adjusting property taxes, insurance costs, the monthly payments go up, and that could affect your property values. Can you kind of talk about how you guys, I guess, are dealing with some of these, struggles with insurance and kind of, the possibility of, what would changing property taxes do?
Well, I mean, ultimately it's difficult, and you hear a lot of, it's difficult dealing with the rising costs.
Mm-hmm.
And in California, you mentioned insurance crisis, which it absolutely is having a huge impact on being able to get insurance for commercial properties. The issue is as all these costs increase, whether it's from energy code, which makes it more expensive to build a building and to do tenant improvements on a building. That's the important thing here. To GHG issues on HVACs and others, where you've just got to get more expensive equipment to put on those buildings, which we understand that we need to reduce greenhouse gases, and we understand we're on board with a lot of the policies that are happening in the state in that area. But there has to be a recognition that those do come at a higher cost. So when you hear tenants and other groups complain about how high rent is, well, that is because as a property owner, it's our responsibility to comply with all these laws, make sure we're complying with Title 24, that make sure we're doing the things we need to do to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint, make sure that we're doing everything we can to comply with ADA laws, parking lot striping, all of that stuff. Those all have costs, though. And each time that there's added costs on commercial property, that ultimately is something that is paid for by the tenants and increased rent as you move forward. So it's something we always try to work with the legislature and let them know how commercial real estate works, what these expenses will do ultimately, and that just means that costs on tenants continuously creep up.
Yeah. You were talking about kind of things that are going to be on this upcoming November election. Can you kind of talk about some of the propositions you guys are looking at and taking a position on?
Sure, happy to do that. First and foremost is we are supporting the school bond. We feel that's extremely important. We've worked side by side with BIA. Well, BIA has been in the lead for the business groups, but Dan Dunmoyer and his team has just done a fantastic job working on that $10 billion school facilities bond. Housing is a crisis in this state. I mean, that's almost cliche to say at this point. And that is a key piece to making sure that the BIA members and more housing is built. So we're supporting Proposition 2 and very much hope that all listeners will support that one. The biggie that we are pushing back against is Proposition 5. That was put on the ballot by the legislature. It was initially known by ACA 1. Then it turned into ACA 10 when they narrowed the focus of that a little bit. But basically what Proposition 5 for commercial real estate is, it's a direct, it will result in direct tax increases for property owners across the state. What Prop 5 does is it lowers that 2/3 vote threshold that was set up through 218, Prop 13 before that, to make it easier to pass bonds for certain projects at the local level.
Yeah.
Our worry is that bonds are directly paid back for by property owners and property owners only. So when it went from ACA 1 to ACA 10, they actually narrowed the types of taxes that could be approved by that 55% vote, and they took out special taxes, which can a lot of times be more generalized and paid for by everybody in a local community, and they focused it on the bonds, which the bonds are only paid back for by property owners.
And this is like the secret tax people don't really realize, because everyone's like, oh, Prop 13, you get 1%, right? Then a lot of these places, because all these kind of secret bonds are like 1.25, 1.35.
Well,
creeps up, right?
I know locally, I live in West Sacramento. Yeah. I know locally in this past year, some of the largest complaints from folks that I know and you just see on the Facebook pages are a lot of the bond payments that are happening. Now, these are all extremely important. Don't get me wrong. They do things like help us fix our levees. They help us build infrastructure. They do a lot of very important projects. My worry is, and my members' concern is, though, by lowering that 2/3 to 55%, you make it easier for something to pass without having to make a strong case for it.
Right.
So we're not opposed to bonding. We think that there's lots of infrastructure projects that do need to happen, but we are a little concerned of dropping that threshold to 55%. Remove some of the impetus and requirement to make a strong case to voters as to why they're needed. And again, focusing it only on property owners is going to have, like you said, it's going to have an impact on renters. It's going to have an impact on property owners that might not be as apparent
Right.
To them until they get that tax bill.
Right. Exactly.
Some of the other ones we're looking at is Prop 33 and Prop 34. Those two kind of come in tandem. But this is, I think, the third attempt at rent control by the group in Los Angeles. I mean, we think rent control is a very bad idea. It will restrict housing. It will make housing costs go up. It's not the solution to the housing crisis.
Right.
Solution to the housing crisis is to build more houses and build more apartments. So we are very much opposed to Prop 33. And then we're also supporting Proposition 34, which, as I think you know, it is somewhat connected to Prop 33 in that what Prop 34 says is groups that are spending money that get federal dollars for healthcare need to spend those dollars on patient care and not on political issues like this one. So that is we're not involved in Prop 34 aside from we are supporting it, but as a political junkie, it is it's a fun interaction that's happening on that one. And then Prop 36, that's the retail theft issue. That's something we feel is extremely important. We support the legislative package that's moving through. I think there's 12 bills, might be 14 bills, but 12 bills in that retail theft legislative package. We hope when they come back in August, that package moves through and gets signed by the governor. We think that's fantastic, but we do also support the initiative that's moving through. We were actually one of the first business groups in the state to endorse that retail theft initiative back in last October, and have worked very hard with the DAs and some others to get that thing put on the ballot. And now we will work to hopefully get it passed.
Yeah. And then, something that you guys were working on that was pulled from the ballot, the Taxpayers Protection Act. Can you kind of talk to us about that a little bit, kind of what it was supposed to do and kind of why was it pulled from the ballot? Kind of unprecedented.
Sure. Taxpayer Protection Act was a long time in coming. It's a way to protect Prop 13 and Prop 218 from both recent court decisions that we don't agree with, obviously, as well as the constant threat of split roll property tax. We saw the last split roll property tax initiative we saw was Proposition 15 in 2020. C.B.P.A. was one of the co-chairs of pushing back against that proposition. This was during COVID, and we ended up soundly defeating that split roll property tax measure by, I believe, 5 points. But the issue is it costs $70 to $80 million to fight, those types of measures, and we really are not in the business of fighting initiatives every couple of years. 15 years ago, when you stopped an initiative, you usually got a little breather, 5, 7, 8 years until it came back. Well, within a few months of us defeating Proposition 15, the sponsors of that initiative were out on the streets already collecting signatures again for another split roll property tax. So we, along with Rob Lapsley in the Business Roundtable, John Kupal at the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, many of our members felt that we had to do something so we didn't have this fight over and over and over again with split roll property tax proponents on the ballot, because they're expensive and they're very, very hard. We also, at the same time, were dealing with a court case, and this gets a little complicated. I'm not a lawyer. We simply refer to it as the Upland loophole. If there are any lawyers listening to this, I apologize. But Upland loophole basically came from a court case in Upland. I think it was over weed dispensary. That then some notions in that court case were pushed forward in San Francisco on their on a local proposition measure C, that essentially they passed a what we would say was a special tax that required a 2/3 vote majority with a simple majority. We sued. C.B.P.A. was one of the plaintiffs in the case, as well as some of our local members. And the court made a decision that was a real head scratcher for us that created a situation, which again we refer to as the upland loophole, that currently in the state of California, if something's put on the ballot by a non-governmental entity, it only needs a 50% vote to pass. If that exact same measure is put on the ballot by a city council, it needs a 2/3 vote to pass. So there's an interpretation of Prop 13 and Prop 218 that we absolutely didn't agree with that court case, and that was another piece of the impetus, was to fix that upland loophole through the Taxpayer Protection Act. We started working on the Taxpayer Protection Act several years ago. It went after, again, the upland loophole, tried to clarify and defend against future split roll property tax measures, mainly by saying any revenue that's collected by a split roll property tax must be kept in the county with which it's generated. Mm-hmm. That takes away some of the incentives for some of the groups that were pushing that. And we felt it was a very good measure. It was some of the best lawyers in the state worked on that. Once we got through that process, our polling numbers, when we did lots of detailed polling, were very positive on that. And last year, the legislature, without ever reaching out and talking to the campaign, we saw ACA 13 was introduced, and what that measure did was it was meant to derail Taxpayer Protection Act. That bill did pass and was supposed to be on the ballot, or would have been on the ballot earlier this year, was going to be on the ballot for this November. So that was one of the reactions to Taxpayer Protection Act. Mm-hmm. And our really good polling, and we know that they were seeing the same polling. Then in December, I believe we saw that the legislature and the governor did put in a petition to the Supreme Court to remove T.P.A. from the ballot. And that started about a 4 or 5 month protracted legal wrangling that was happening. Of course, I'm not involved in the legal wrangling, right. But the folks that we work with really were. Ultimately, the Supreme Court made the decision that it was just too big of a change to be in one proposition, and they did remove it from the ballot. So we're going through the legal analysis of that now. We still have the issues that are hurting and impacting our members and want to fix them, but we need to go through a thorough legal analysis and figure out what the next steps are for 2026.
Yeah. As someone who's kind of lived in this proposition world, talking with consultants, you've obviously seen probably a lot of polling the last 4 or 5 years. Have you seen like a shift in the electorate and kind of what they're worried about or concerned about from 4 or 5 years ago, and kind of what is front of mind for voters as you're doing polling right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing all the same thing that's getting reported in the newspapers. It's homeless issues are number 1, 2, and 3. The biggest shift I think I've seen is much bigger resistance to tax measures when asked. So I do think that that's a little bit of a shift, maybe before COVID, that the numbers we're seeing when you're asking a voter if they'd want more protections or want to protect the protections they used to have, is you're seeing a lot more people saying yes on that, and that's both Democrats and Republicans. T.P.A. was polling very, very high. It was very, very popular initiative. Even with the title and summary that we had, which was not beneficial to the Yes campaign, once you got beyond that title and summary and actually talked to folks about the elements of what was in TPA, they were, again, 60s and above across the board.
It's interesting. Earlier, we were talking about housing and homelessness and how, the state is working on building more housing. It's something that's, been talked about ad nauseum for 6 years. Can you talk about kind of, the commercial real estate role and kind of building more housing and, And has that morphed as, more mixed use projects are being announced and, different laws are being passed about converting, commercial to housing projects and the like?
Sure. Well, the state's large home builders build the vast majority of houses. On For C.B.P.A, we have many members who do commercial, but then also mainly will do multifamily. So the apartment side of things, multifamily side of things is where our members' main interests are. But in order to make all these projects happen in California, it's become so complicated in terms of how you're able to get a project put together these days to comply with GHG, with the vehicle miles traveled issues, with complying with local ordinances and regional air quality issues and air boards. Is I think what we're seeing is as many more master plan type communities where somebody comes in with a project that has, it's not just single family homes, but it's single family homes. It'll be multifamily. Then there'll be a piece for retail, commercial, and industrial. So, I mean, I think that's the biggest changes that we're seeing is a lot of the projects that are moving forward these days have kind of all aspects of real estate within them. And the biggest surprise for me is the industrial piece. We've learned, we've had a number of warehouse bills over the past 5 years that we've been working on. And I've had, I won't call it an epiphany, but I guess I've had a steep learning curve to understand exactly how the warehouse and industrial sector actually works within the overall ecosystem of how things get built. We really rely on BIA and a lot of the large home builders to go in, identify areas where houses are going to be built, and then many times our projects, the commercial side of things, will follow right after that. Everybody wants work-life balance. You don't want to have these 45 to hour and a half long commutes. So we want to make sure that there are commercial buildings, everything from office buildings, again, retail for the shopping, fun, entertainment, to the warehouses that supply them, are all co-located with one another. So we are pushing down the VMTs that service those residential areas, so you don't have to drive forever for work, and that you have shopping very nearby.
Yeah. I guess, we were talking about how the world changed, and about how there's kind of, I guess, a lot more online shopping, which means, I guess, a lot more warehouses than maybe you'd have 10, 15 years ago. And, we're talking about a lot of, former offices being converted to housing. We've had some members on really pushing this kind of former office to housing. Is that something your membership is interested in? And, a lot of people you talk to say it's not really that feasible, but,
So
what are you hearing?
We're absolutely interested in it. We love the conversation of office to housing conversion. We love the conversation of adaptive reuse. We love the conversation Buffy Wicks has been leading and taking some properties that are maybe zoned for retail right now and figuring out a way to incentivize them to be turned into mixed use projects or even affordable housing projects. We love that conversation. The mistake that gets made is just because somebody owns a piece of commercial property that they want it to be commercial property forever.
Right.
Absolutely not where our members are. What our members want is the highest and best use for the properties that they do own. So all of this conversation is something that we're in the mix on, very positive. We'll have a ledge day in August, and we'll be advocating for a number of the adaptive reuse bills that are out there. The issue is with the office to housing conversion is it is not easy or simple to take especially a new office building, and this is fascinating. Well, it is if you're a commercial real estate nerd. My worry about 2 years ago when we started hearing all this push for office to housing conversion, once we looked into it and I got educated by my members on it, was that it would be seen as an easy panacea to take an office building and just turn it into housing like that. And we would start seeing legislative bills that mandated that. thinking that, just recalcitrant office building owners just didn't want to turn it into housing. Well, the issue is, which it sounds like you've had some conversations on this, is the commercial building world and the residential world are worlds apart in terms of converting one to the other. And the more interesting thing, I think, on the office to housing conversion is something called floor plates. I don't know if you've gotten into this level, but to turn an office building into residential, the older the building is, the better. And the reason for that is because before the modern miracle of HVAC systems, commercial buildings used to be built like letters, basically. So a old C or in the shape of an H, right?
Yeah, it's like this building.
Yeah. So this is as a C.
Yeah.
So this is an older building, because before HVAC systems, you wanted to have your floor space. Well, this was a hotel, but you wanted to have floor space near windows. Once modern HVAC systems came into play, most modern buildings now are all squares or rectangles, right? So they're very large floor plates. And a very large floor plate is very difficult to turn into a residential floor plan, because you have the whole interior of that very large floor plate, which is very, very far away from the windows. And I don't know about you, but I don't want an apartment with no windows in it. So that's one of the interesting things in terms of the office conversion is
there's a lot of square footage there in the middle, right?
So these older buildings that are shaped like a letter, those are the ones that are easier to convert into residential. Newer, larger buildings, like and this conversation started with San Francisco buildings, right? Was nobody's going back to work in downtown San Francisco, so let's just turn these into
like this.
Affordable housing. Yeah. And that's where this, most of those buildings they were talking about were these very large floor plated buildings that just aren't conducive to that.
Right.
Then beyond that, you get into cost. Converting something that was built for an office environment where there's one centralized bathroom, or maybe even two if in a building, and then turning that into apartments where you need plumbing for 10 different units. Unless you want a centralized bathroom in the apartment you're living in, the costs are pretty high when you do it. And you saw an example of that here in Sacramento. The hotel that they converted to affordable housing ended up being, I don't want to say a stat because it'll be wrong, and then I'll get
but it was a lot. Yeah.
It was something like between $500,000 and $600,000 per unit. Which is very expensive for affordable housing.
Yeah.
That's the cost.
But I guess isn't that crazy? Because Joe Patterson out in Rockland always tweets about how he was doing projects. I think he said new low-income housing units are like nearly $1 million a unit to build brand new.
So that is the cost of doing business in California and building and some of those issues. But in terms of the adaptive reuse, it's not super cheap to be able to convert some of those buildings. So a lot of the nicer, older buildings you see that have been converted, they're kind of high-end residential, because the cost for doing it is so much. And in order to be able to make that project pencil out, you have to have rents that meet it. We would love to figure out a way, and we actually have put together an adaptive reuse work group at C.B.P.A. to figure out what the state could do to incentivize.
Well, yeah, that was my question. Is like, there's so much of this is out of the control of the state, right? Interest rates, construction costs, inflation, the actual cost of the land. They can't really do anything out of that. Like, what can the state do to kind of help incentivize?
Well, that's the fun. Well, so Hawaii incentivizes affordable housing construction and adaptive reuse through tax credits, and that is something we would love to see. There be a significant tax credit to make some of these projects actually pencil out. But it is an absolute thicket when you get into it in terms of it's not just tax credit. It isn't the only thing out there. There's everything, from statewide CEQA laws, the neighbors who don't want an office building to be converted into residential, costs of doing business and labor for those types of projects, and then down to local regulations
Yeah.
of um, mitigations that are required, air quality issues. So it is a pretty complicated thicket. But if we could come up with something that just even allowed 5% more of these projects to actually happen, that would be fantastic. And that's, one of the things that's out there is the Wicks bill that we're supporting, that looks at some retail properties that are out there, and properties that are zoned either retail or commercial, figuring out how to eliminate some of the barriers to these projects and allow those properties to be repurposed. From our point of view, what we love about that is that we hope that it will incentivize some more mixed-use projects where everyone talks about walkable and
Right.
and all that, but you don't really see a lot of projects that are truly walkable. But what you need there is you need density of people living there, and you need a density of the ability to sustain restaurants and some jobs. So we think that that's a really interesting approach, and hope that that it will produce some more of these types of projects.
Yeah. So we're in the break right now. You said you're having a lobby day coming up in August, so that must mean you guys have some bills of interest coming down the last stretch here. Kind of, what are some of the things you and your members have your eye on here in the last 30 days?
There's a number of bills that we're supporting, which sounds crazy because we're a business group, but we actually
You're not all no.
we actually had a number of bills this year that we really went out of our way to figure out how to put some positive ideas forward, see if we could work with the legislature and move those through. We have 2 bills that are still surviving the legislative process that we hope we'll be able to advocate for in August and get those to move forward. They're both very simple technical fixes. We're not trying to change the world. We really took the approach of tell us what are some things in statute that just don't make sense. One of them is trying to work with something that's been in state law for over 100 years and has been annoying to commercial real estate for a long time, but came to play more in COVID, and that is aligning a legal statute in terms of unlawful detainer with the rest of the statute and just matching the dates up. That's all we're trying to do, is match the dates up with 2 different pieces of statute. So that's something that we see as just a small technical fix, but ultimately will make managing commercial property a little bit more sane and easy. We also have a bill that we're working with one of our local associations on out of Los Angeles, NAIOP Greater Los Angeles, NAIOP SoCal, that is just changing the notifications on if you have a piece of property that gets zoned to a different zoning, just to make sure that you have a little bit more time if you have a piece of property that gets the zoning gets somehow changed or the densities on it get changed, that there's a little bit more time for you to be able to figure it out. Those are 2 of the bills that we're working on there. We did have another bill on trying to make it easier in cities that have a stacked up local planning desk, trying to get permits for both TIs and new commercial buildings, to use something that's already in state law to allow the permittee, if they're unable, if the timelines are too long, allows them to go to an external third party to do some of the plan check on that, bring it back to the city, and then move forward. That got hung up this year. It's our first year running that bill, and we hope to come back with it. We think it makes a lot of sense, and it builds on some of the changes already in state law in terms of on commercial real estate. If you're doing a TI, tenant improvement, you got somebody who wants to move in, and a restaurant, and you need to get that property turned over, and you need to put in some ovens and some safety. That the time issues on pulling a permit are extremely important, and I've been told over and over and over again throughout the years, anything we can do to move along that permitting process is very important. Over the years, local planning desks have shrunk. Some cities that used to have 15 at the planning desk now have 2 or 3. They are relying more and more on external contractors to do some of the work at the local level. So our idea is just, hey, these are already, folks are already working together. Some of this easier stuff, low-level TIs and others, we could do the same thing, pay for it on our dime, and then bring it back to the city. So that's one of the issues we're working on.
Yeah, it seems like you're going to have a busy month up ahead.
August will be fun, right?
Yeah.
It's the final sprint of session. We get to go through the suspense files. Every lobbyist's favorite time of year is
Exactly.
seeing the suspense files.
Yeah.
And then a 2-week sprint on the final bit of session. We moved our legislative day from June and May and June, which a lot of folks are here in May and June. It was very hard to be heard above the den during that time, as you know. Sometimes you can't even get into the swing space.
Right.
We moved it to August a few years ago because we wanted to make sure that if we were bringing a small group of people into Sacramento, that they could talk to legislators on bills that were absolutely relevant and everyone would be voting on within the next few weeks.
Right.
So we have found that change to be a very good change for us. It works really well.
What do you do
for
at
us.
the first week of August, or?
We try and time it so we do it the week just after suspense. So it's the second week of August. It hasn't always worked out. Sometimes depending on when they do suspense, but that's what we want. Because when you bring business owners to Sacramento, they aren't experts in the legislative process. They aren't sometimes experts in all the weeds of some of these bills that we have issues with. But they are expert in how they run their businesses, the jobs that they're providing, how commercial real estate works. So we've tried to pivot a little bit from coming in and just being, pounding the table on, we hate this bill, we hate this bill, we hate this bill, to using the opportunity of having some sponsored bills to have a conversation. Even that technical bill that we have, that will allow say somebody who comes up for our legislative day who's a property manager to just talk about the issues related to how property management is different on the commercial side, how we work with tenants, how we got through COVID, things like that. So that's the importance of those sponsored bills, and coming in August, where only bills we'll be talking about will be things that will be on the floor. So you also don't get the issue earlier in the year where you have some bill that's maybe in local government committee and not going to be heard yet, and there's only 11 legislators that will actually vote on that bill anytime soon. So a lot of times legislators don't want to talk about those if they're not on that committee, because they know they'll be changed, or
by the time it comes up, they'll forget about it.
Yeah. So I hope I don't want to tell anyone my secret, but we have found that moving to August has been
everyone's going to move their
now everyone's has been a nice change for us, and we think that the folks who do come to Sacramento get more out of our legislative day because we're focusing more on positive sponsored bills that we're doing. Of course, we have some we don't love. It's just the nature of the business. And I love using the line, we love to see our friends from the coastal communities come spend 2 days in Sacramento in August.
Right, exactly.
Last year we had...
they appreciate you more.
No, they are not happy. Last year we had our legislative reception in the evening on the little patio at Prelude right over here. And it was a nice 92-degree day. For those of us who live in Sacramento, 92 degrees is, perfect day in Sacramento. It doesn't feel that hot in August. We were in the shade. The evening, just felt beautiful. But boy, we got a lot of complaints about how hot it was. So
they should have been here yesterday. When it was 109. And
so we're not doing any. My one promise I made to my members this year is we won't have any outdoor receptions this time.
Smart. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. It seems like you have a busy August here, and wish you the best of luck. And love to catch up with you later on this year to see how you guys did, what you're working on.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And I love listening to the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.